Hey everyone, and welcome back. So, we had a listener reach out, right, wanting to know what's the real deal with soy and all the talk about whether it's healthy or not. And honestly, I get it. There's a ton of info out there. I mean, you've got actual research papers and then like all these articles online saying all sorts of things about it.
It's true. I think it's one of those topics that can feel really overwhelming, Like, where do you even start? We actually got sent quite a few sources from this listener, too.
Yeah, scientific reviews, general health websites, the whole works. So we thought, hey, let's do a deep dive on this, really dissect it, and see what we can pull out. Like what are the most important things, what's maybe a little surprising, and what can you actually do with this info? You know what I mean?
Exactly. And we really want to cut through that confusion, right?
Right. So today we're going to break down soy, like what is it, what's in it, nutritionally speaking, and then most importantly, we're going to look at the evidence behind all those health claims, because there are a lot, right? And by the end, you'll have a solid grasp on what the science actually says. And hey, if you're into this kind of deep dive, this in-depth look at stuff, make sure to check out our Detox Health YouTube channel where we explore all sorts of health topics.
Oh, for sure. There's so much good stuff over there.
All right, so first things first. What exactly is soy? Where does it even come from?
Okay, so soy or soybeans, to be precise, they're beans. Legumes, specifically. Yeah. And they actually originated in East Asia. They've been a staple food there for centuries, actually. And one of the coolest things about soy is that it's so versatile, right? It comes in so many different forms.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, you've got your basic boiled soybeans or edamame, like those young soybeans that you get steamed still in the pod, super tasty with a little salt. And then there's tofu, which is basically made by curdling soy milk and then pressing it. So kind of like a process similar to how you'd make cheese, but with soybeans instead of milk. And tofu's awesome because you can find it in so many different textures, super soft or firm.
And then you've got the whole world of fermented soy, which, not only gives it a completely different flavor profile, but it can also change its nutritional properties.
Totally. Think about miso. That amazing, savory paste that's so big in Japanese cooking. It's made by fermenting soybeans with salt and koji. Koji is a type of mold that helps with the whole fermentation process. And then there's tempeh, which is huge in Indonesia, where they basically take whole soybeans, press them together, and ferment them, and you get this, really dense, almost cake-like block. And then there's natto. You familiar with natto?
Well, yeah, natto's interesting. Definitely an acquired taste, for sure.
Haha, right. It's fermented soybeans as well, a traditional Japanese thing, and it's got a very, how should I put it, a very distinct texture.
Haha, yeah. Let's just say it's not for everyone. But I think what people might not realize is how much soy is actually used as an ingredient in other foods, in forms that you wouldn't even necessarily recognize right away.
That's a great point. Soy flour and soy protein, you'd be surprised how many products those end up in. It's breads, cereals, even some processed meat alternatives, and soybean oil, right? That's huge in the cooking oil industry. It's used in margarine and all kinds of stuff. Then there's soy lecithin, which acts as an emulsifier. It helps blend ingredients together. You'll find that in everything from chocolate to salad dressings. Oh, and of course, who could forget soy sauce? That's made either by fermenting soybeans or sometimes through a chemical process. It's everywhere.
It really is. So you can see soy is super integrated into our modern diet,
Yeah.
in so many ways.
Okay, so it's definitely multi-talented, food-wise. But let's talk about why there's all this buzz about soy and its health effects. What makes it so interesting, nutritionally speaking?
Well, first off, soy is a fantastic source of protein, a really good one. And our sources actually highlight that it's what we call a complete protein, which means it's got all 9 of those essential amino acids, the ones that our bodies can't actually make on their own. And it provides them in really good amounts. In fact, the amount of protein in soy milk is super comparable to cow's milk.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. But it's not just about the protein, right? There's more to it.
Right. Soy also contains healthy fats.
Oh, that's good. Which ones?
Yeah, so we're mainly talking about monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. Yeah. The kinds that are good for your heart. And it's naturally pretty low in saturated fat, which is a plus. We can't forget about fiber either. If you look at boiled soybeans, edamame, and tempeh, they've got a decent amount of fiber per serving. We're talking 10.6 grams in boiled soybeans, 4.7 in edamame, and 2.8 in tempeh. Tofu, because of how it's processed, tends to have less fiber, though.
And it's a good source of vitamins and minerals, too, right?
Oh, absolutely. So we're talking several B vitamins, iron, although it's important to note that it's non-heme iron, which is the type found in plants, and it's not absorbed as well as heme iron from animal products. but it still contributes to your daily intake. And then you've got potassium, magnesium. Tempeh is a good shout for iron, actually. A 100-gram serving gives you a good chunk of your daily iron needs. And then a lot of those soy-based products like soy milk, yogurt alternatives, and some types of tofu actually have added calcium. So they can be a good option if you're trying to up your calcium intake, but, maybe you're not doing dairy.
Gotcha. And then there are the really unique compounds in soy. The isoflavones. I feel like there's a lot of discussion about those.
Yeah, isoflavones definitely get a lot of attention, and for good reason. There are these compounds, phytoestrogens they're called, because they kind of resemble human estrogen in terms of their chemical structure.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. They don't actually behave exactly like the estrogen our bodies produce. They have this thing called a selective estrogenic receptor modulation effect, right?
Yes.
It's
Selective estrogenic what now?
haha, it's a bit of a mouthful, right? But basically, imagine them like keys. These isoflavone keys can sometimes fully unlock an estrogen receptor. Sometimes they'll only open it a little. And sometimes they can actually block other stronger keys like our body's own estrogen from even getting in. It all depends on the specific receptor and what other keys are already in the mix. So, their effects aren't always straightforward. They can vary depending on things like your own estrogen levels and even the type of tissue we're talking about.
So that explains why there's so much debate about them.
Exactly. And to make things even more interesting, our sources point out that people metabolize isoflavones differently too.
What do you mean?
Well, like how our bodies process these compounds, and that can impact how potent they actually are for each person. So it's super complex, and this is definitely an area where more research is really important to give us a clearer picture.
Okay, so that makes sense. I'm seeing why this is so complicated. And actually, just to give everyone a visual here, our sources even included a handy figure that shows the protein content in all these different soy foods. Like you can really see how much protein is in tempeh, boiled soybeans, edamame, tofu, those soy yogurt alternatives, and fortified unsweetened soy milk.
It really highlights what a protein powerhouse soy can be.
Totally. Okay, so we know that soy is pretty nutritious, right? And it's really versatile in how we can eat it. But let's get to the big question, the one I know is on everyone's mind. Is soy actually good for you? Or are there real health risks that we need to be aware of? It feels like the messaging has been kind of back and forth on this for years.
Totally. It's definitely been a long-standing debate. So let's dive into some of the major health claims, right? And let's really look at what the science tells us. Let's start with cardiovascular health, because that's a big one that soy has gotten a lot of attention for.
Yeah, I remember all the hype early on about how soy could lower cholesterol.
Right. So in the beginning, there was a lot of exciting research, including a 1995 meta-analysis. And for anyone who's not familiar, a meta-analysis basically combines the results of tons of individual studies, So they looked at all these studies, and it seemed like eating a good amount of soy protein, around 50 grams a day, could lead to some pretty significant drops in LDL cholesterol, the, bad cholesterol.
Right. And I remember the FDA even got involved, didn't they?
Yeah. They actually allowed this health claim on food labels that linked soy protein to a reduced risk of heart disease. That claim that says, consuming 25 grams of soy protein a day as part of a diet low in saturated fat and cholesterol may reduce the risk of heart disease. You've probably seen it.
I have, yeah. But I feel like that claim has been kind of questioned in recent years, hasn't it?
Yeah, you're right. As our sources point out, more recent studies, including a 2000 update by the American Heart Association, found that the cholesterol-lowering effects of soy were probably more modest than we originally thought.
Interesting. So maybe not as big of an impact as everyone thought.
Right. And then, get this, in 2017, the FDA actually proposed revoking that original heart health claim because they felt like newer trials were showing inconsistent results. And the European Food Safety Authority, they actually weighed in too. They concluded that there isn't a super strong established link between soy isoflavones and keeping your LDL cholesterol in a healthy range.
Wow. So it sounds like the effect on cholesterol is more complex than we thought.
Yeah, it's definitely not a simple yes or no. It seems like the impact is probably more moderate and, likely depends on other things in your diet and even individual factors.
Okay. So maybe the cholesterol story isn't as clear-cut as we once thought. But does soy still have any benefits for heart health?
It looks like it does. Research has actually shown that eating soy can lead to a small but still significant reduction in blood pressure, which is definitely a good thing for your heart, right? And then there are other potential benefits that studies are starting to uncover. There's some evidence that soy might improve how well your blood vessels function, might lower inflammation levels. And some studies have even found a possible link to reduced waist circumference. And there's even research suggesting potential improvements in how the upper chambers of your heart function and in arterial stiffness.
Huh. That's pretty interesting. So even if the cholesterol thing is a bit more complex, it sounds like there's still a decent amount of evidence that soy could be good for your heart in other ways.
Exactly. It's more of a holistic picture.
All right. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about another big concern that comes up a lot with soy. Cancer, specifically breast cancer and prostate cancer. I feel like that's where a lot of the worries about soy really started.
Yeah, you're right. And a lot of the early concerns, especially those that came from animal studies back in the late 90s, they suggested that soy isoflavones might actually encourage breast tumor growth. And there was even some worry that they could interfere with how well certain breast cancer medications worked. But it's so important to remember that animals don't process isoflavones the same way humans do. Their metabolism is different. And the good news is that decades of research have shown us that, unlike what those early studies in animals suggested, eating soy does not increase breast cancer risk in humans. And in fact, it might even offer some protection.
That's really reassuring. I mean, those early studies were pretty scary. So are you saying that humans actually respond differently to soy compounds compared to animals?
Exactly. And thank goodness for that, right?
Right. So what does the research with actual humans say?
Well, there have been so many studies since then. Studies involving women who've had breast cancer, women who are at higher risk, and healthy women. And those studies have consistently shown that eating soy foods or taking soy isoflavones does not have any negative effects on markers for breast cancer risk.
That's really good to know. So no increased risk, but is there any indication that it might actually be helpful?
Actually, there is. Several large observational studies, and remember, observational studies look at patterns in large groups of people, but they can't prove cause and effect. But they found that higher soy intake is linked to a significantly lower risk of breast cancer coming back, and even a lower risk of dying from breast cancer, which is pretty amazing when you think about it.
That is. So what could be driving that protective effect? Like, how does that work?
Well, the exact mechanism isn't completely clear yet, but one of the leading theories is that the isoflavones in soy might act as like antagonists in breast tissue. They might kind of compete with the body's own estrogen for those receptor sites. And since our body's estrogen is stronger, the isoflavones could potentially reduce the overall estrogenic stimulation in those tissues. So it's not that they're mimicking estrogen's effects, they're sort of diluting them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And it's important to emphasize what all the major health organizations are saying about soy and breast cancer, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like the American Cancer Society, the American Institute for Cancer Research, the World Cancer Research Fund, the Canadian Cancer Society, they've all come out and said that soy foods are safe for women who've had breast cancer. And they even include soy in their dietary recommendations for cancer prevention. So there's a lot of support for that view.
That's really good to know. What about prostate cancer in men? Is there a similar, clear picture there?
Well, the research on soy and prostate cancer is a little less definitive. There's some evidence suggesting that soy intake might be linked to a reduced risk, but it's not as consistent as what we see with breast cancer. Like, some studies have shown a potential benefit, while others haven't found a clear connection.
So less conclusive.
Right. But even so, based on what we know so far, it seems like including soy in the diet is still a reasonable approach for guys who are concerned about prostate cancer.
Okay, so that makes sense. Another thing I hear a lot of, especially from guys, is whether soy can mess with, reproductive hormones and fertility. There's that worry that it might lower testosterone levels.
Yeah, that's a super common one. And, it's understandable. The concern comes from the fact that isoflavones do have some estrogen-like activity, right? But what's really interesting is that a very large and thorough 2021 meta-analysis, and remember, a meta-analysis combines lots of studies. Well, this one looks specifically at this issue and found no evidence that soy intake, even at high levels, had any negative effects on male reproductive hormones, including testosterone. They looked at sperm count and other semen parameters too, and there was no effect there either. And that myth about soy causing enlarged breasts in men, no scientific basis for that at all.
Wow. That's actually really surprising, given how much that idea is out there. So the research is basically saying that's not true.
Yeah, pretty much. The science is pretty clear on that now.
That's great to know. What about women? Does soy affect estrogen levels in women?
It's interesting. Studies with women haven't shown any major effects of soy or isoflavones on the overall levels of estrogen circulating in their bodies either. Now, some studies have noticed a small increase in the length of the menstrual cycle with like really high intakes of soy. But even then, the changes are still within what's considered a normal range. And when it comes to pregnancy, the limited data we have doesn't suggest any negative impact.
Okay, good to know. Now, thyroid function is another one that comes up with soy. I remember hearing something about soy formula and babies.
Yeah, so that goes back to some early case reports of infants developing goiter when they were fed soy-based formula. But it turned out that was mainly because some of those early formulas were low in iodine. Once they started adding iodine, the issue was resolved. Later on, though, there were some lab studies and animal studies in the 90s that suggested isoflavones might interfere with how our bodies produce thyroid hormones.
Oh, I see. So the initial worry was about iodine, but then the research started looking at the isoflavones themselves.
Right. But, when you look at studies done with actual humans, the concerns about isoflavones and thyroid function haven't really been borne out. The European Food Safety Authority, they did this huge review and concluded that soy isoflavones don't negatively affect thyroid function in postmenopausal women. And then another meta-analysis, this one looked at overall thyroid hormone levels in a bunch of different populations, and they didn't find any major impact from soy or isoflavones either. And there was also that worry about soy making things worse if someone already has low iodine intake. But studies looking at that haven't really found any evidence of thyroid problems, even with soy supplements, as long as people are getting enough iodine in their diet. So, all things considered, it seems like for most people who are getting enough iodine, moderate soy intake probably won't have any major negative effects on their thyroid.
Okay, so that makes sense. What about soy in our brains? I vaguely remember a study that came out a while back, something about tofu intake and cognitive function in older men, and it kind of raised some red flags.
Yeah. You're probably thinking of that 2000 observational study. That one linked higher tofu intake in middle age to some markers of cognitive decline and brain shrinkage later in life.
Yeah, that's the one. That was kind of concerning, wasn't it?
It definitely got people's attention. But it's super important to keep in mind that this particular study had some limitations. Like, the number of men in the group that ate the most tofu was relatively small, and the study relied on people remembering what they'd eaten years ago, which, memory isn't always the most reliable thing.
Right, right. So maybe not the most solid evidence.
Yeah, and the researchers themselves acknowledged that their findings were pretty preliminary and needed more investigation.
And has there been more research on this since then?
There has. And get this, a more recent meta-analysis that look at clinical trials. So these are studies where they actually intervene and control what people are eating well. This meta-analysis actually suggested that soy isoflavones might have a positive effect on memory and overall cognitive function.
Wow, that's kind of a 180 from that earlier study.
Right. Although the researchers do say that more research is definitely needed to confirm this, so it's not a done deal. But it's definitely an interesting avenue for further exploration.
Definitely. So could soy actually be good for our brains? That would be amazing.
Potentially. It's an exciting area of
It's a-
research.
Totally. Okay, so let's move on to menopause. A lot of women going through menopause are looking for ways to, deal with the symptoms, especially hot flashes. Does soy have a role to play there?
That comes up a lot. And, the thinking is that since soy isoflavones have those estrogen-like properties, maybe they can help make up for the drop in natural estrogen levels during menopause. Now, the early studies looking at this were kind of all over the place. Like, some showed a benefit, some didn't.
So no clear answer.
Not at first. But as research has continued, it's become clearer that a particular isoflavone called genistein seems to be really important. Like, one meta-analysis found that taking soy isoflavones did lead to fewer and less severe hot flashes. And that effect was even stronger when people were getting more genistein specifically.
Interesting. So it seems like genistein might be the key player there.
Yeah, that's what the research is pointing to. But one thing to keep in mind is that it's still tough to make really firm conclusions across all the studies because they all use different designs, the different types of soy, different doses. So it makes it hard to compare apples to apples, so to speak.
Right. Makes sense. Okay, last question about soy in general. Are there any side effects that people should be aware of?
Yeah, good question. It's important to remember that soy is one of the major food allergens, actually. Like, it's on the EU's list of the 14 most common food allergens. That means any food product sold in the EU that contains soy has to clearly state that on the label. And if you experience any symptoms after eating soy, like a runny nose, itchy eyes, sneezing, skin rash, wheezing, shortness of breath, or any digestive upset like stomach pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, It's always best to check in with your doctor or a healthcare professional to get personalized advice.
Yeah, definitely good advice. Okay, so we talked about soy in general. Now, you mentioned soy protein isolate earlier, and that's like a different thing from eating whole soy foods, right? Can we break that down a little bit?
Of course. So, soy protein isolate, like our sources explain, is basically a really concentrated form of protein that's extracted from soybeans. And because it's so concentrated, it's usually around 90% protein. It's often used in protein powders, supplements, and as an ingredient in lots of processed foods.
Makes sense. And what are some of the potential benefits of using soy protein isolate?
Well, there's evidence that it can help lower both LDL cholesterol and triglycerides, and it itself doesn't contain any cholesterol or saturated fat, so that's good. And for anyone who's vegetarian or vegan, it's a really great source of complete protein. It provides all 9 essential amino acids, and often in higher amounts than other plant-based proteins.
Yeah, I can see that being super useful.
Right. And then some research suggests that replacing animal proteins with soy protein isolate might be good for your cardiovascular health. And it can help you feel fuller for longer, which is helpful if you're watching your weight. And even though it's more processed, it still provides some fiber, which is good for digestion. Plus, it's got those B vitamins, zinc, iron, and some products are even fortified with calcium and vitamin D. And of course, like whole soy foods, it contains those beneficial isoflavones, which, as we talked about, might be good for bone health after menopause and maybe even help reduce the risk of some cancers.
So it sounds like there's a lot of good stuff packed into soy protein isolate.
Yeah, it's pretty nutrient dense for sure.
So where would our listeners typically find soy protein isolate? Like, how is it usually consumed?
The most common way is probably in protein powders and shakes. And those often have added vitamins, minerals, flavorings. And it's also used in soy flour and soy grits, which you might find in some breakfast cereals, processed meats, even some baby formulas.
Gotcha. And hey, if anyone wants to learn even more about the different types of soy and how they can impact your health, they can always check out our Detox Health YouTube channel.
Absolutely. There's a ton of info there.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, a lot of information. Can we summarize the key takeaways for everyone? Like, what are the most important things to remember about soy and its effects on our health?
Yeah, for sure. So to recap, soy is a really nutrient-packed food that offers a whole range of potential health benefits. The evidence, like we discussed, suggests it can be good for your heart, might help lower the risk of breast cancer, and even help prevent it from coming back. And there's some promising research on its potential benefits for prostate cancer, for managing those high flashes during menopause, and even for supporting cognitive function. And, what's really interesting is that a lot of those early concerns about soy, the ones that often came from animal studies or like anecdotal reports, they haven't really held up when you look at the research in humans.
That is interesting. It seems like what we thought we knew about soy is shifting a bit as we do more research with people.
And, we briefly touched on those concerns about anti-nutrients in soy, but those are mostly reduced by the way we typically prepare soy foods, like soaking them, cooking them, fermenting them. And honestly, in a balanced diet, they're not usually a big issue.
That's good to know. And what about the phytoestrogens? We talked about those. Are those actually harmful?
The current scientific evidence doesn't really support that they are. And for anyone who's concerned about GMOs, there are plenty of non-GMO soy options available these days.
Great point. And I've also heard that soy can be helpful for people who are trying to lose weight. Is there any truth to that?
There is some evidence that suggests soy can be helpful for weight management, especially when it's part of a higher protein diet. Protein tends to make you feel more full and satisfied, which can help you eat less overall.
That makes sense. Okay, so in practical terms, what are some easy ways to incorporate soy into our diets?
Oh, there are so many. Like with tofu, you can get really creative. You can roast it, scramble it, add it to stir fries or soups. You can even blend silken tofu into smoothies to make them extra creamy. Tempeh is great, crumbled into veggie chilies or in sandwiches. Edamame is a super easy, healthy snack. Miso adds this wonderful umami flavor to soups and dressings. You can easily swap cow's milk for fortified soy milk in your coffee or cereal. And soy protein powder is a really convenient way to get a protein boost, especially after a workout.
Yeah, I love adding a scoop to my smoothies. And hey, if anyone out there is loving these deep dives, these detailed explorations into different health and nutrition topics, let us know. We love getting feedback. And we'd love to explore other topics that you're curious about.
Definitely. We want to bring you the information you're looking for.
And hey, don't forget to head over to our Detox Health YouTube channel for even more great content. They do some amazing deep dives over there.
For sure. Lots of good stuff to check out.
Okay, so as you're thinking about all the info we covered today, here's a little something to ponder. Considering how versatile soy is and all those potential benefits we talked about, what's one small change you could make to your diet, something soy-based, that you could try incorporating? Not because you're chasing some crazy health claim, but just as a way to add a nutrient-rich food into your meals. We always encourage everyone to think critically about the information you come across and to do your own research. And hey, maybe this deep dive has sparked some curiosity, and you'll go off and explore soy a little more on your own.
Love that. It's all about empowering yourselves.
Right. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the science of soy. It's been fun. And for all of you listening, don't forget to check out Detox Health YouTube channel for more insightful content. We'll catch you in our next deep dive.